Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. We're in kind of a nice, intimate space together this morning. I would say to a couple, it kind of feels like we're in the upper room together with Jesus. Although it's not spring, it's summer, and it's not evening, it's morning, and the sun is awfully bright. But at the same time, so are you. So thanks for being here for worship. A couple of things. I have some pre-worship homework for you to do. Because it's almost back to school for me, so I'm getting ready. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a note card and a pencil. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to read it. I'm not going to read it. No one's going to read it. But what I want you to write on your note card is something you're worried about. It can be anything. Or if you need more than one, also cool. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put them in the basket, and then I'm going to put the basket by the altar. Okay? All right, so that is our pre-worship assignment. All right, so here's what I'd like to invite you to do first, is everybody just take a nice deep breath. Breathe it in, hold it for a second, release it out, and we're going to give these things to Jesus. Put those right there. All right, now we're going to do kid time early. I need Jordan and I need Daphne to help. Can you come on up? All right, we're going to come right over here because you guys are experts now. How about it? All right, so tell me, what happened yesterday with your cousin? Summon's baptism, exactly. What happened? What'd you see? Water. Hey, we got water. You guys want to help me pour the water in the bowl? You got it? Want to help too? All right, here we go. And then you want to be dramatic? Bring it up a little bit so everybody can see. All right, that's pretty good. Okay, then there were some words that happened, right? When Pastor put the water on his head, right? He said, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? Remember that?
Yeah, but I don't want my clothes if I
No, he's not baptized.
I'm not going to baptize you. You're good.
You're already baptized.
You know what you say, Daphne? You say, I'm all set. I'm all set. But you know what that means? I mean, that's kind of fancy talk. But you know what it really means? It means we're all a part of God's big family. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to remind everybody that they are part of God's family. So we got a mobile font, so you just put your finger in there, right? There you go. And then you can just say to somebody, you're a part of God's family. Remember that, right? You're a part of God's family. Remember that. Should we go around and tell everybody? So they all remember? Let's do it. Come on. You guys want to come?
Follow.
All right, here we go. So in the beginning, when we say our confession together, a lot of times we cross ourselves, or at least the pastor does. And remember that. Remember what we're actually calling on is we are part of God's family. That's what our life of faith is all about. So let's do that. We begin in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Let's start with our confession. Amen.
The first reading from the book of Genesis, the 15th chapter. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, You have given me no offspring, and so a slave born in my house is to be my heir. But the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. No one but your very own issue shall be your heir. He brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and count the stars, if you are able to count them. Then he said to him, So shall your descendants be. And he believed the Lord, and the Lord reckoned it to him as righteousness. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Before I read the gospel, what I'm going to invite you to do, you can stay seated. Why not? Put all your stuff away. Close it up. Close your eyes. We're going to take another nice deep cleansing breath. So breathe it in. Hold it for a second. Breathe it out. Let these words of Jesus come to us from Luke, where Jesus says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action. Have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down and eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those servants. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also, therefore, must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. All right, so Jesus tells us a few things here. He tells us this little parable about coming in the middle of the night, which in some ways seems distressing. Stay awake. Be ready. Keep the lamp lit. It seems like there's a lot hanging in the balance for us to do in the meantime. And yet there is, because the thief is coming, and we've got to be ready for that too. But there's this wonderful promise that opens this whole thing. "Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." So in spite of all of these things, of keeping ready or not, of staying awake or drifting off to sleep as you nod along, of keeping the lamps lit or having it run out, what is the promise? The promise is it's God's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So do not be afraid. So we started this morning. I invited you to write down some things you were worried about. And we've got a lot of them here. And I also told you that we're not going to read them or share them, which we're not. But I also placed them on the altar, and I placed them there on purpose. Because why? Because these are the things that we're supposed to hand over. If we are people who are called to grace and mercy, and being reminded again and again and again that we are part of God's family, these are not our burdens to bear alone. They are not even just our burdens to bear together, but we bear them with the one who bared all things for us, Jesus the Christ. And so we put these things on the altar in front of this beautiful cross, beside the sacrament which we are about to share, and next to the font which claims us again and again and again, to be reminded not to be afraid, not to be afraid. And yet here we are in the middle of the night. So our first reading is about the middle of the night, starring Abraham and Sarah. It's kind of an interesting story. It takes up a good chunk of Genesis, although we just get a little snapshot of it here. Abraham and Sarah, who are first named Abram and Sarai, who live in a far-off place called Ur, which is in modern-day Iraq someplace. They're in the Fertile Crescent. And God comes to them and tells them to leave everything and go to the land that I will show you. No GPS, no explicit directions, no hand-holding along the way, just go. I mean, do you think they were afraid? Had a little anxiety or worry about what might happen next? I think so. think so. They're going to be a great nation, God tells them. Well, how can this be, they say. But yet they leave everything. They leave their family. They leave their friends. They leave everything that they've ever known. They pack it all up. They take it with them. And they're going to go to the place that God shows them. And we even hear at the end, God reckoned to them as righteousness. We think, okay, these are like really faithful people. Like they're really going to get it. But if you read the story, and one of the things I just love about so many Bible stories is that the people that are in them are just like us. Full of worry, full of fear, full of making the wrong choices sometimes. And have their own pain and brokenness in their lives. And yet who is really faithful? God. God is faithful to them. So they get to the land. They part ways with Lot. They get into the land and they leave. It doesn't look like it can grow anything. It's a hot summer like this where everything's brown. And so they go to Egypt of all places. A little foreshadowing of what's to come in the Exodus story. Abram gets afraid. Sarah is invited to be part of the king's harem because Abraham says, well, she's my sister. He doesn't even tell the truth. It's the Pharaoh who actually uncovers the truth and does the right thing. So, hey, you need to be together as a couple and go to where God called you and sends them on their way. They're starting to lose heart, as all of us do, by all these worries that we have written down, not just on cards, but on our hearts that we carry with us wherever we are. And they're not sure if it's going to work out. I mean, maybe they were just hearing things. Maybe it was just wishful thinking. Maybe it was just a nice pipe dream or something. But then God comes to them again in this beautiful little scene that we have today, where Abram's out and looking at the night sky, and God reminds them that as many stars are in the sky, even more descendants will you have. Even greater will the nation that I'm calling you to be a blessing to everybody. What that is going to look like. Now, I remember when I was a little kid, sitting on my parents' deck, looking up at the night sky. I could make out the Big Dipper. I could make out Orion. But I lived just outside Chicago, so the city lights drowned about everything else out, as you know, John. I thought, okay, 10 or 12 kids, that's a pretty good promise. That's pretty great. That's about as many stars as I can see, as well as all of the airplanes hanging around in the sky waiting to land in O'Hare. Then I went camping for the first time with my grandparents up in central Wisconsin someplace, and just saw, it was a new moon, so just the brightness of all of those stars, and thinking to myself, holy smokes, reminding myself of this story, and I was still a kid. Wow, that's what God was saying. And then you think even in the times, the thousands of years since, even the last 100 years, 50 years, 30 years, year, of what we've been able to discover about the universe, its vastness, its complexity. And then you start to think, holy smokes, these little worries that I have, could God even look at them twice? There's so much. It's so big. It's so vast. But what does God promise us? Do not be afraid, little flock. Have no fear. It's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. We have this one that comes to us, that loves us so much, cares about us so much, and dies for us, and suffers alongside us in a way that it's hard to comprehend at times. And yet in the complexity of the universe and the pain that we all carry and the worries that we share, God's right there, smack dab in the middle of them. Now Abraham and Sarah didn't even go great for them after that. So there were more betrayals. There were more trials. There were more complexities. There were more pains that happened between them. There's a moment where these three visitors come and visit them, and Abraham says to Sarah, get out the food and the hospitality for these strangers. And even though they're up in years at that point and well beyond the time when they could have their own kids, these three strangers remind them, you will have a son. And Sarah laughs because it's so ridiculous to even comprehend that anymore. Remember that old promise years ago, and that the stars up in the sky? No way, that can't happen. And yet when Isaac is born, his name means he laughs. There's a little bit of a wordplay there. There's that moment where Abraham takes Isaac up onto the mountaintop, and it looks like a test of faith. He's going to go and sacrifice his only son. You think to yourself, holy moly, what is this about? When God reveals this other animal that will, this other ram that will take and share its blood instead. I had a rabbi come to one of my seminary classes and share this story. And Rabbi Citron's reflection on this was not so much it's a test of faith to do what you have to do always, which certainly there's an element to that story, but it's also about God saying no. In a culture in the Near East in those days and the religious fervor of that time, child sacrifice was prevalent, and God is saying no to that. There's another way. I will show you that way and give you that way and provide another way. In those moments in our lives that are full of worry, doubt, pain, and it looks like we're just stuck and there's nothing we can do about it, God's asking us to hang in there, to trust, to give ourselves in a bit of a surrender to the promise that he gives, which is that the kingdom's for you. Fear not. Not be afraid, little flock. It's the Father's pleasure to give you the kingdom. I have this little book that's one of my favorites. It's little. It's 86 pages. You could probably read it in an afternoon. I've given this book away probably, 20, 30 times. It's called The Will of God by a guy named Leslie Weatherhead. He was a pastor in London while it was being bombed during the Battle of Britain. And the chapters of this book are little sermons that he gave his congregation as the bombs were falling, as the air raid siren was going off, as their lives were literally being destroyed, and people in his congregation also likely being killed. And he talks about the will of God in a way that I have found tremendously helpful over the years. Usually we kind of say it when we're not sure, or when we don't have another answer. Well, this must be God's will. And there's certainly something to handing our lives over in that way. But what he outlines are 3 different ways to think about God's will at work in the world. So the first is kind of the original will or intentional will, which is, what does God desire for us? What does God want of us in life? What are we supposed to do? Who are we supposed to be? And of course, we're reminding it we're part of God's family. That's who we're supposed to be. What are we supposed to be? Just like Abraham and Sarah, we're supposed to be a blessing to others. Jesus puts it this way, love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Right? This is who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do. But we know that life isn't like that all the time, and it gets messed up. It's full of our own brokenness and mistrust and cynicism and all the things we see in the world, hatred and people being treated poorly and injustice and all of it. We see it all and we lose heart. We're like, if this is how we're supposed to be, why is it so broken? And then there's, I'm going to skip ahead, the third part is God's ultimate will, which is saying that in the end, it's all going to work out. God will bring us to where we need to be. If we're a part of God's family, and we are, it's all about hanging in there, trusting, believing that even in the thick of things, God is there, right there beside us. And that at the end, just as the story in the scriptures end, with everybody gathered in the city of God, by the river, by the tree of life, singing songs and hymns to God, Jesus there right in the midst of them, wiping away our tears and pain and saying they are no more. We have the second will of God, which meets us right in the middle, which is circumstantial, which is all about what we're going through right now, right in the middle of it, right in the things we don't understand. right when we feel the most lost, most broken, most afraid, most worried. And it's that place where Jesus meets us in his cross, the ultimate circumstance for you and for me and the world. That the sin and brokenness around us or even within ourselves, our worries, our doubts, our fears are not what defines us. What defines us is this amazing promise. Do not be afraid. Fear not. It's your Father's will to give you the kingdom. And so we march through and think about this little parable. Standing at the gate, waiting, knowing the thief is threatening, of course, but also joyful. There's the bridegroom is coming. It's going to be a party when Jesus shows up. And we're invited to be a part of it. When I first started being a firefighter, it's about 4 years ago now, what happens is you join up and you start training once a week, and then you're also invited to go on calls. They're not going to put you in a position of things you haven't done yet, but what happens is your little pager or alarm goes off, you go to the firehouse, you get your stuff, you get dressed, you hop in the truck, you go to the call, there's all kinds of noise and confusion, there's sirens, there's lights, people are getting ready, usually the officer's giving out instructions, you can hear stuff going on the radio. And I remember, it was the first couple months I joined, one of the first calls I was on, and thinking to myself, oh dear, what did I get myself into? And then I looked adjacent to me, sitting here. When you're fully dressed in your stuff, it's like another 60 pounds of things you're carrying between your pants and your jacket, your helmet, your pack, tools you might grab. And the young woman who's sitting adjacent to me is probably 150 pounds with all the gear and maybe carrying something heavy. She's small, but she's amazing. I've looked to her since I joined because she's highly skilled at what she does. I'm big enough where I can just kind of bowl through things, but she's got to know how to do it and do it well. I'm always asking her questions. But we had gotten on the truck, and in the midst of it, all those things going on, I watched her. I don't think she even noticed I was looking, but she stopped, she took a deep breath, and she just crossed herself, and we were on the way. And I think that's it. That's what it's about. Right in the middle of all the worry, all the anxiety, all the things you don't think you can do, all the things you don't think you're going to follow through on, the places where you've messed up, the things that you're not sure how they're going to work out, is to just take a pause and a moment, take a deep breath, and remember who you are. Yesterday I was on a big call. There was a fire in Niantic. There was first a little kind of routine carbon monoxide call, which is usually the person needs to replace the battery. So I was on that, and while that was happening, we got called to help out at this other fire. And we left a couple people at the first scene, and we went back to the firehouse with, sirens blazing and lights flashing, pick up a couple more people, and get back on the truck. And we're going, and it's the same as it always is. There's noise, there's confusion, there's everybody getting ready, there's orders being issued, there's communications being given. And I just sat there for a second and watched everybody get ready, and took a deep breath, and thought, okay, it'll be fine. Part of it is, we trained for that. You've trained for this. That's what life is. We're always constantly trained through our experiences, through our relationships, through the things that we know and have done, the gifts that we have. And when we face these things that scare us, that frighten us, we're reminded, and should remind each other, I think, to just take a deep breath, hold it for a second, and remember who you are. You are a part of God's family, and you are loved.